The League of Nations was the money cartel's first attempt at world control, but Tsar Nicholas II of Russia caught on to their plot and sabotaged it. That proved to be a deadly mistake. Schiff, Warburg, Rockefeller, Harriman, and Morgan backed the uprisings that led to the 1917 Russian Revolution. Their strategy was to finance both sides of wars and revolutions, which gave them control over the winners, the losers, and the outcome.
3 years after World War I broke out, the Russian Revolution toppled the Tsar and installed the scourge of communism. Jacob Schiff of Kuhn Loeb and Company bragged from his deathbed that he had spent $20 million towards the defeat of the Tsar.
Politicians, major industrialists, and the military, unable to reach a compromise with the Tsar, gravitated to the idea of a conspiracy. Many of them, political adversaries in the open, were allied behind the scenes, all members of a secret Freemason brotherhood, the Great East of Peoples of Russia. Founded in St. Petersburg about 1912, the organization was controlled by a Supreme Council and had more than 300 members. In 1916, popular lawyer Alexander Kerensky became head of the Supreme Council. He and other Great East members nurtured a plan of an anti-Tsarist coup.
What did the order want to accomplish in the Bolshevik Revolution?
You create opposing forces which you place in conflict. Out of conflict, you've got profit, you've got political power, and you can direct history. And if you look at the writings, for example, of the Trilateral Commission, they talk openly in the Trilateral Commission about managing conflicts, not solving conflicts, but managing conflicts. Conflict management, that's the cry.
So they got the profit, the power, and the management. Where do they want to steer history through the Bolshevik Revolution?
They wanted to set up, and they did, two opposing forces. Out of that came World War II. There were logical steps in the process. They used the same bank, Guarantee Trust Company, as the conduit for the financing of Hitler, and also as a conduit for financing, and also the early days of the Russian Revolution. In fact, in Russia, Soviet Russia in 1923, a vice president of Guarantee Trust Company was the foreign director of the Ruscom Bank, which was the first Soviet overseas bank that was set up. They were that close in those days.
In the second half of the 19th century, a new dynamic was beginning to express itself in the political landscape of the world. Previous to this, the world had been dominated by a system of empires, typified by the British Empire's commitment to thriving off the sheer brute labor power of uneducated, enslaved populations. In the name of free trade, the British East India Company enforced an economic policy devised to maintain the dependence of its colonies upon its control of maritime shipping throughout the world. By flooding foreign markets with cheap goods, they would force other countries to devalue their labor to the point where their only recourse was either the employment of slave labor or the elimination of manufacturing altogether. By these means, Britain's colonies were to forever remain vassals, with the sole purpose of supplying raw materials to the empire. In 1865, the young nation, the United States of America, under the leadership of President Abraham Lincoln, triumphed over the concerted efforts of the British Empire to break her apart through support of the Confederacy and other means of subversion. The American system, based upon freeing and fostering the creative capacities of mankind, thrived upon a culture of scientific advancement and development of basic economic infrastructure. A vast railway grid, stretching from ocean to ocean, reinforced the internal sovereignty of the nation and secured independence from any external sea power. In this way, the United States became the first continental sovereign nation-state to establish itself on the map in the entire span of recorded history. The international consequences of America's achievement precipitated rapidly. The popularity of the American system spread throughout the globe, as other nations perceived its successful thwarting of the British Empire. Nations such as Germany, Russia, and Japan underwent rapid development. Germany, in particular, began to develop a vast network of rail and canals. With such an immense system of infrastructure, it quickly became a leader in industry throughout not only Europe, but the entire world. The productive output of Germany's Ruhr region was second only to the powerhouse of America, the Pittsburgh region. With Germany's exports growing, so did its maritime power. And as it laid plans to fund the construction of a continuous rail grid from Berlin to Baghdad, it emerged as a significant threat to the long-standing British world dominance. Though America could no longer be subverted by military means, such tactics were still fully deployable by the British against other nations. With the 1888 accession of Queen Victoria's imprudent grandson, Wilhelm II, to the German throne, the British Empire needed only to set the trap. Under the maintenance of his uncle, England's King Edward VII, Willie had no difficulty in falling for it. Earlier in the 19th century, Britain's Lord Palmerston, notorious for his foreign manipulations, had already prearranged the ploy. Were any conflict to break out between Germany and France, Palmerston well knew that the Belgian territory would be a crucial strategic position for German success. Thus, under his instigation, Belgium was set up as a neutral country, meaning that should any nation violate Belgium's border, that nation would immediately become the target of British aggressions. Britain had but to lure them in. Germany, however, had grown to such a power that Britain and France alone would not be capable of defeating her. Once the British drew Russia into an alliance against Germany after Kaiser Wilhelm II disintegrated the alliance with Russia, the supplemental power the British sought to wage a two-front war against Germany was secured. All that remained to be introduced was the spark. The convenient assassination of Austrian heir apparent Archduke Franz Ferdinand, carried out by means of Serbian nationalists, ignited the situation, pitting the Germans and Austrians against the Russians and French. In the aftermath of Germany's military defeat, on condition of the 1918 armistice, the army and navy were completely dismantled, and all of Germany's locomotives and train cars were extracted from the country. The 1919 peace conference in Paris excluded Germany from the negotiations. The full burden for all damages incurred through the war were heaped upon Germany. As an initial installment, 20 billion gold marks were to be paid to the Allied victors in the form of German bonds, redeemable either in gold marks or physical goods. Germany was to be stripped of its entire merchant marine fleet. It was to produce 200,000 tons of ships each year, along with reconstruction equipment for the Allied nations. 100,000 head of cattle were to be relinquished to France and Belgium alone, along with hundreds of thousands of other farm animals. This would occur in tandem with a continued naval blockade, which had already reduced the food intake level of the German people to half that of before the war. Not only were Germany's materials to be extracted, but key border territories were to be ceded to surrounding countries. The Alsace-Lorraine region, possessing the most developed canal system for transport of materials and products from the Rhine River, as well as large deposits of iron ore and coal, was to be turned over to France. Upper Silesia, another choke point of industry and transport, was to be ceded to Poland. The sudden loss of manpower, resources, rich farmland, and factories would slash the ability to meet the reparations requirements. These were the terms of the Versailles Treaty. Were Germany to refuse them, the defenseless nation was threatened with invasion and occupation. In the words of the German government, they had no choice but to sign their own death sentence. In the period between 1919 and 1921, Germany proceeded in forced march to fulfill the payments. The German government printed paper Reichsmarks to buy up the greater part of produced goods in order to hand them over for reparations. Thus, since most of the production went toward payment rather than the development of the nation, nothing remained as a foundation to give value to the currency. In May of 1921, the London Steered Reparations Committee unveiled their second set of terms, declaring that Germany must pay 132 billion gold marks, an impossible sum. The process set into motion in Germany was one that economists described as the triple curve. The threefold process of feeding a ballooning financial bubble using an expanding money supply looted from a collapsed physical economy represents a single typical collapse function. Like the separation of the boundary layer during transonic flight, the act of divorcing the money supply from the physical economy generates a self-feeding shock front. This shock front develops rapidly until it reaches a critical point of instability, where the rate of increase in the monetary aggregates surpasses that of the financial aggregates. This singularity marks the transition between two entirely distinct spaces, where the governing processes on one side no longer apply on the other. As physicist and mathematician Bernhard Riemann recognized, this type of discontinuity is characteristic of all physical processes. Significantly, it is the most characteristic feature of the anti-entropic development of human physical economies. All human modes of operation constitute what is called a phase space, a constructive geometric space of variable curvature and dimensionality representing the domain of all potential activity. In short, a set of physical laws. In a human economy, the boundary conditions governing these laws are represented by the degree of technological development, typified here by available energy resources. A wood-burning civilization has a necessary upper limit, not only on their total energy output, but on the possibility for that resource to sustain a growing population. If man were merely an animal, the depletion of that resource base would result in periodic fluctuations in the human population, a cycle of growth and collapse, maintaining the human population at constant median value, like that of every other living creature on the earth. On the contrary, however, the characteristic of human economic development is to surpass each encountered boundary by the introduction of newly discovered principles, transitioning from resource base to resource base, forming, in effect, a continuous curve of discontinuities. This is the reflection in the large of the human creative capacity which empire seeks to eliminate.